We have a lot to cover in today's video, including the latest trade talk around teams like the Leafs, Senators, Flames, and Canucks. Plus, we have 22 players that have filed for salary arbitration. We have a couple of NHL players that have retired and some other news around the league. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover in this video. First up, I want to get started with the fact that we have 22 NHL players that are filed for salary arbitration. Today was a deadline, and generally most players wait till the last minute to put the application through for the arbitration hearing, because obviously their preference would be to settle a contract with the team without going through that process. It's like essentially going to court, and really you don't want to end up having to do that, because you're going to be arguing against your team, and you're going to probably hear your team say some things about you that you're not going to like, because they're going to be arguing to pay you less money. So ultimately they're going to be talking more about your deficiencies and why you should be paid less. Now, I'll caution you as well. I'm going to talk about the players that are going through this process, but I would not worry about it too much if you're a fan of these teams or these players, because a large majority of these cases get settled before the actual hearings take place. Usually, this is a common number. You get 20, 25 players every year will file for arbitration, and you might get one or two that ended up actually going through the process. Now, I did a study on this a couple of years back, and a very high percentage of players that go through the salary arbitration process and actually have a hearing are gone from the organization within 2 years. It's a high number. It was like 80, 90 or something, 75 to 80%, I believe it was, that I figured out, because, you know, it does tend to have a big impact on the relationship, unfortunately. So hopefully most of these players get things sorted before it reaches that point. But we have 22 players, including 4 goalies, which include Ilya Samsonov in Toronto, Jeremy Swayman in Boston, and Philip Gustafsson in Minnesota. We have some defensemen, including Vince Dunn in Seattle, along with Cale Fleury, Ian Mitchell, who was recently traded to Boston, and of course Will Borgen as well. On the forward group, you've got Tanner Jeannot in Tampa, Gabe Vilardi now with Winnipeg, Troy Terry in Anaheim, Ryan McLeod in Edmonton, Philip Kurashev in Chicago, Brett Howden in Vegas, Trent Frederick in Boston, Ross Colton, formerly of Tampa, now with the Avs. You got Noah Cates in Philly, Morgan Barron in Winnipeg, Alexei Torpchenko in St. Louis, Jack McBain in Arizona, and Joe Connor in Pittsburgh. So ultimately, like I said, these players, and there's other ones as well, they're the most notable names amongst the group here. I'll show you a list on the screen of the full list here. Like I said, there's a few other names that you're interested in. Ultimately, how this works, like I said, is they file for the arbitration hearing as a measure to make sure that if they can't get it done on their own, that they have this to fall back on. Now, you do need to have a certain level of experience here. You can be a restricted free agent and not have arbitration rights. Like, you need a couple of extra years beyond your rookie contract to have that eligibility. It's usually your final 2 years of RFA status that you have that. Now, teams can also walk away from these awarded contracts should it reach this stage. If the contract is offered and settled through arbitration, and the player is awarded more than $4.538 million, that's the threshold, that or more, then the team can say, yeah, you know what, that's too rich for our blood, we're walking away, and then the player becomes an unrestricted free agent, and they can sign anywhere. That's also something that has happened, but it's not super common. So we'll see. Now, the other thing to keep in mind as well is that players, once they file for salary arbitration, they're no longer eligible to get an offer sheet. So anybody who's been toying with the idea, thinking about, geez, I wonder if my team would go after this guy. He's still not signed. He's an RFA. Their team doesn't have a lot of cap space. Now that they're into this process, these guys will no longer be eligible. And then the other thing too is they can't go back and just accept their qualifying offer, because obviously they were qualified, so the team retained their rights. They can't just get out of this now and say, okay, I'll just go back and accept that. So that changes that process. Again, the team can walk away if the arbitration award is 4.538 or more. So we'll find out. The dates for each of these players will be set here shortly. They'll likely take place in the second half of July and into the early part of August. And you'll probably get a lot of these being announced as being settled on their own before those dates end up coming to be. As I mentioned as well, we had a couple of longtime NHLers announce their retirement today. Longtime NHL forward Patrick Hornqvist, who played with a variety of teams, most recently with the Florida Panthers, played a long time with Pittsburgh, was with the Predators as well, has retired at the age of 36. He was the very last pick in the 2005 NHL draft, 230th overall. So this goes to show you that it doesn't matter how late you're picked. If you're picked and you get an opportunity, things can happen if you work hard enough and keep pushing for your dreams. He's a prime example of that exactly. He played 961 games, 264 goals, 543 points, 2 Stanley Cups, both with the Penguins, including scoring the 2017 Stanley Cup winning goal at that. And of course, he also won the World Championship gold medal for his country with Sweden in 2018 as well. It sounds like there's a possibility he's going to remain with the Florida Panthers organization and take on another role within the front office of some capacity, maybe player development. I'm not quite sure. There was no real title or anything thrown around, just that he's talking to the Panthers and might work with them in a different role. So congratulations, Patrick Hornqvist, on a long NHL career. He was a hard guy to play against from what we've seen, tough, and certainly was a pest at times, but he was very productive and certainly found a role in the NHL. So congrats to him and wish him the best of retirement. And the other announcement as well came today from a longtime Flame defenseman Michael Stone, who's a couple of years younger than Patrick Hornqvist. Of course, is the older brother of Vegas captain Mark Stone, who just won the Stanley Cup. Michael Stone enjoyed a 12-year NHL career, all pretty well under the regime of Brad Treliving. Of course, he was drafted by the Arizona Coyotes. He started his career there. Of course, Treliving was with the Coyotes as an AGM before becoming the GM in Calgary. After he went to Calgary, he ended up bringing Michael Stone there later, and Stone ended up had a longer-term deal and got bought out, and then he re-signed, and he's been doing a bunch of one-year deals as well. So he got 12 years in between Arizona and Calgary. He is going to remain with the Flames organization, and he's also going to be taking a role within the player development team. That division of the Flames organization was actually looking for somebody to work with their defensive prospects. So he already knew that they were looking for somebody to help out with the defense. And since he's a defenseman with a long NHL experience, he talked to them, and this kind of helped him make the decision that retiring was an easier choice. But he said the last few years where he's had a wait and see and struggle getting these one-year deals, league minimum, not being in the lineup every day, it just became kind of hard and tough on the family, and decided that after all this time that essentially it was time to move on and take a new path here with hockey and with the Flames. So congratulations to Michael Stone as well on a long NHL career. Now, we could get something unexpected happen tomorrow in the NHL waiver wire. Now, we know that Filip Zadina of the Detroit Red Wings was placed on waivers a couple days back, and then he cleared. Of course, that was caught everybody by surprise, because you don't get much waiver wire activity this time of year for starters. And secondly, with a former high draft pick, from the 2018 draft, who's still in his early 20s, it really didn't see it coming. But after we got more information from Steve Yzerman saying that he and his agent had requested a trade, and that he had he talked to a lot of teams around the draft, and afterwards, and just nothing materialized. So since he wasn't really able to trade him, he thought he'd put him on waivers and give another NHL organization an opportunity to take him off their hands and pick him up for nothing. The problem is that Filip Zadina is making $1.8 million for still 2 more years on his contract. So the actual real cash dollars is over $4 million owing to him on this deal. So clearly teams probably would be more than willing to take a flyer on this kid and give him another chance, but not at that price range. That's the problem. I know a lot of people were quite stunned when we found out the next day that he cleared. I've seen a lot of people on social media saying, "Oh, I hope my team picks him up. I know he hasn't done well, but he's young, he has potential." And then a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe nobody took him." I was like, I personally wasn't surprised in the least. Not that they wouldn't be interested. It's just the contract's the problem. Tight cap space all around the league. It's an issue for a lot of teams. When you get a guy who's a project, you don't want to make him close to $2 million a season. At league minimum, $700,000-800,000. Okay, that's different. So at this point, it's rumored that tomorrow we might see Zadina back on waivers, but this time for the purpose of contract termination. So he would have had to mutually agree, because the Red Wings can't just buy, or not buy him out, but just terminate him without just cause. Of course, if he does something that breaks the law, do other things, you see the odd scenario like that. But generally, you have to mutually agree. Both parties say, "Okay, yeah, we're gonna both agree to terminate this," then they could do that. So he'd be walking away from a fair bit of money. So he must be really unhappy with the Red Wings organization if he's willing to leave that much money on the table and say, "Let's terminate the deal and I'll go get signed somewhere else and start over. Ultimately, that being said, that's a big thing. But it's one of those cases where it's not his fault that he's overpaid, but that's really what the problem is right now. So we'll see if he ends up on waivers tomorrow, if he could be bought out for a contract termination, or terminated, I should say, not bought out, not the right word. And then he'll be a free agent. Another team could pick him up and sign him for a league minimum or what have you, and he can hopefully get his career back on track. But this is taking a swerve that we did not see coming here at all. Now, looking at some of the NHL trade rumors I want to look at today, is there a handshake deal kind of put in the drawer, so to speak, between the Vancouver Canucks and the San Jose Sharks? It sure sounds like one. I've heard multiple NHL insiders say they had intel around the time of the draft to suggest that they had an agreement to trade Tyler Myers from Vancouver to San Jose in exchange for Kevin Labanc. Now, both of these players, you could argue, would benefit from a fresh start, and both teams would be interested in moving said contract. So I don't think there's any shocker that either player would be mentioned in a trade rumor or possibly even be dealt. Now, a couple of reasons why this may be held up and has not happened. For one, Tyler Myers has a $6 million cap hit, but he's only making $1 million salary this coming season. But he has a fairly hefty signing bonus. But the way his contract is structured, his signing bonuses aren't paid on July 1 like a lot of NHL players. His are due in September. Maybe they did that for this reason. If they put it late into the calendar, that would be less likely he could end up in this predicament. But maybe once the calendar falls through to September and the bonus is paid, San Jose would be more likely to take him. It helps with their cap space, obviously, because they have space that they can use, but they don't have a lot of actual cash that they have to pay them. But obviously, that would be a good value for them to have Tyler Myers at $1 million actual cash. I think a lot of teams would be interested in that. Now, a couple of other things too you got to factor in. The San Jose Sharks are heavily involved right now with trying to trade all-star defenseman Erik Karlsson, who makes a ton of money. So clearly, whether or not Erik Karlsson is on the roster or not will probably play a role in whether or not they take Tyler Myers. Obviously, they may not need another defenseman if Karlsson's still around. So that might play a factor here as well. So we'll have to wait and see what happens, but obviously, like I said, it'd be an opportunity for both players to go to a new team and to finish up their contracts and to see if they can't find some better results to get things back on track. So if Karlsson is indeed moved and later into the campaign here in the offseason until September, don't be shocked if we see these two teams possibly hook up if these players are still on the on the respective rosters and available for trade. On a UFA rumor, there's some talk that the Tampa Bay Lightning might bring in veteran Phil Kessel. Of course, he still has not found a home for next season as of yet. He made it clear after winning the Stanley Cup with the Vegas Golden Knights that he had every intention of wanting to play this season. Certainly at this point, he has every right to be picky, and to be honest, I'm not sure there's going to be a ton of interest in Phil the Thrill. His career is certainly winding down. He's not the same player he used to be, but as of right now, he's still the NHL Ironman leader. And if he gets a contract, he very well could continue to push that streak up to more games. That's a real possibility we could see. But will Kessel get a contract, and will he be an everyday player and continue that? We'll have to see, because we don't know that yet. But right now, Phil Kessel's rumored to be linked to the Tampa Bay Lightning. We know they don't have a ton of space, obviously, so it would be a cheap short-term contract. After losing a guy like Alex Killorn, they could certainly use another veteran around to help out. But of course, at this point, they haven't signed Tanner Jeannot here as of yet. Jeannot is a player that filed for arbitration, as we talked about earlier. So that contract needs to be sorted to see what else they have available. And I wonder what they're going to do with goaltending. They did bring in Jonas Johansson, who had kind of bounced around on a few teams, including Colorado, before he signed. But is he going to be with the minor league affiliate, or are they expecting him to be the backup to Andrei Vasilevsky? Because Brian Elliott was not brought back. As of right now, they don't have any other NHL experienced goaltenders. So I wonder if they're done in that position, or if Johansson's going to be their guy. That's certainly a bit of a downgrade if he's going to be expected to play a lot of games, or if Vasilevsky were to get hurt or anything like that. But I'm not sure what else they're planning to do, which will obviously impact their cap space, and I'm not 100% sure if they're able to squeeze Kessel in or not. Of course, they do have some wiggle room with LTIR, so we'll have to see where things go, but there is some talk that Phil the Thrill might end up in Tampa. When it comes to the Calgary Flames and Noah Hannafin, we heard before there's a few teams that were interested in acquiring his services. We know that the Flames obviously traded Toffoli. We don't know what's going on yet with Backlund, Hanifin, or Lindholm, which is kind of dragging on here, to be honest. And if I'm Craig Conroy, I don't want all of this going too deep into the summer. You need to know where everything's at. They apparently have a big contract extension on the table for Lindholm, but he has not accepted, and they don't know what he wants to do yet. Hanifin made it clear that he does have every intention to not resign, so he is very likely to be dealt. There's a few teams that were linked in before, but nothing's materialized. But a new team has emerged, and apparently the Dallas Stars are also kicking tires on bringing him into their organization. Now, they already have a pretty deep blue line, so I'd suspect that a defenseman would have to go out to Calgary. I'm not sure exactly what they would do in that regard. So I don't know if they move a younger guy like a Nils Lundqvist, or I can't see them moving Thomas Harley or anybody. Of course, Heskinen's definitely not going anywhere. So it's debatable on what they would do in that regard, but there is some talk that they're interested. Maybe a player like a Mason Marchment goes to Calgary in a trade like that. I don't know. They certainly would need to move money out. Calgary would definitely have to take a contract back, and I think they'd have a very crowded blue line if a defenseman wasn't included. So that could either be a bigger deal going to the Flames or a domino effect with a separate deal. But look for Dallas to maybe be kicking around on Hanifin. But other than that, it's been pretty quiet when it comes to Backlund and Lindholm. And like I said, that's not good. You want to get these things sorted and settled so you know what to expect later into training camp. A couple of other things here as well. The Toronto Maple Leafs, as we know, need to do something with Matt Murray. Now, they're likely going to take their time with this for a couple of reasons. For one, as we mentioned, with the players filing for arbitration today. Now, one other thing I didn't mention is once teams have these players settled through arbitration, if it actually goes to arbitration and gets settled, they get another buyout window. So obviously the Leafs could still buy out Matt Murray, depending on how the Samsonov contract goes. So that's a possibility. Now, to be a buyout after that arbitration case is settled, you have to have been on the roster as of the previous NHL trade deadline, and you have to be making at least $4 million a season. So Murray qualifies under both circumstances. So they could do that, but the belief is their preference would be to trade him. Obviously, if they trade him, they can get their full cap hit off the books, and they don't have another piece of the cap hit for next year, because they would, with 1 year left on there, it would be spread over 2 years. So it would be a little bit of dead money for a season that they would obviously prefer not to have. Dave Pagnotta of the fourthperiod.com is reporting that the Leafs are looking at a few things that they're not done dealing. They're not done trying to, make some adjustments to the roster. Clearly, the two big ones are the Matthews and Nylander extensions, which we talked about here quite a bit lately. They're still quite a ways apart with both players, about $1.5 million on Nylander. And Matthews, we don't know the exact gap, but we know that he won't take anything more than 5 years, and it sounds like 3 years is optimal for him, but we'll have to see what they decide on. But when it comes to the Murray situation, Pagnotta mentioned that they would obviously have to add a sweetener for a team to take him. Based on his health history and his inconsistent play, you're not going to just give him away. Teams are going to need something, and apparently they're toying with the idea of having Nick Robertson be that incentive. Now, we've seen them use high draft picks as being an incentive before with other deals like this, and they probably are getting tired of losing those draft picks, so this would be a way for them to avoid that, but it still gets rid of a pretty good prospect. So I don't think fans would be too happy about that, but at the same time, I don't think they'd be happy if they have to give away a first-round pick either. So that's just one of the speculations out there what they might be doing. So we'll have to wait and see what Toronto does, if it's a buyout or a trade. They're probably going to have both options. I don't know where he could go, but they're going to have to get him off their books to be compliant. There's no ands, ifs, or anything about it. Now, when it comes to Tarasenko, we heard earlier today that he fired his agent and is now being represented with a new agent, being Pat Brisson, JP Barry at CAA Hockey. Quite a finagling situation there. And if you missed that video, check it out. I'll went into a little bit more detail on the full scenario around Tarasenko and the agent and what all went down there. But the latest on him is that apparently he had some multiple offers that was looking at short terms, anywhere from 1 to 3 years, between $5 and $6 million is what the rumor was that he was getting from teams. Now, there was speculation that it was obviously the Hurricanes and the Senators were the primary two teams. There was a rumor about the Rangers in there, but it was a really cheap deal to go to the Rangers. I'm not sure if that still stands. And then, of course, there's some other teams too that Friedman was talking about today that might now be kicking around since all this went down. You could throw in teams like San Jose and Nashville are reportedly showing some interest now as well, because basically they have to circle back to these teams, kind of start from scratch here, right? So at the end of the day, we don't know. But Andy Strickland, who covers mostly the St. Louis Blues, that's where the team is most connected with, he obviously knows Tarasenko from those days, so he still has some connections there. He was reporting that it sounded like, just the way he worded things, is that the Debrincat trade was likely holding up a Tarasenko signing, and that there was a good chance. He made it sound to me like there's a really high probability of Ottawa landing Tarasenko, but we'll see. When it comes to Debrincat, though, there's another team now connected. Of course, still most NHL insiders feel the Red Wings are a team that's going to land him. And I think that they need to figure out a way just to get this done so we can all move on and get him moved on and get this team settled. But the Seattle Kraken are apparently also kind of kicking around here. Now, the Kraken have a lot of interesting players. Now, they don't have a lot of like higher end, higher profile players. So Debrincat could be a good fit there. Now, Jared McCann scored 40 goals last year. If they can bring in Debrincat, who's a former 40-goal scorer, and then he can hit that as well, that could give them, some big threats on their lineup. But they have a lot of players that kind of qualify as, on a lot of teams, as, middle six wingers. They just had a really good team approach last year, and everybody firing on all cylinders. So they'd have some interesting options they could offer Ottawa, whether they want to go down to like Oliver Bjorkstrand or an Eeli Tolvanen, or, I don't think they'd go down the road of a Shane Wright just yet, but, they have some interesting players that would intrigue Ottawa, and I honestly think they wouldn't have too difficult of a time figuring something out. So we'll figure out later on what happens here, but don't be surprised if Seattle keeps kind of sniffing around. It might be involved. I think Detroit's probably the preferred landing spot for Debrincat, but if the Kraken offer something that he can't refuse, then it might end up going west and go a different way. So we'll see what happens. But let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.